I've been a judge for a long time. I've heard arguments that made me angry, evidence that made me sad, testimonies that left me shaking my head long after the gavel fell. But nothing in all my years on this bench has ever stopped me the way a 9-year-old boy did. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't ask permission. He just stood up, small shoulders squared, voice quiet but steady. And what he said in the next 2 minutes didn't just change the outcome of a case. It changed every person in that room. If you believe that truth doesn't need a law degree to be heard, and that sometimes the most powerful voice in the room belongs to the smallest person in it, stay with me. And if stories like this matter to you, subscribe right now, because this is one of those mornings I will never forget for as long as I sit on this bench. The case looked ordinary when it first came across my desk. A dispute between two parties over money, over responsibility, over who owed what and who had failed whom. The kind of case I've seen so many times I can usually feel where it's going within the first 5 minutes. I had no reason to expect anything different. The mother arrived first. She didn't have an attorney. She didn't have a folder of neatly organized documents or a rehearsed opening statement. What she had was a worn handbag, careful posture, and the kind of eyes that come from too many late nights and not enough certainty about tomorrow. She was a working mother, hourly shifts, sometimes doubles, whatever was available. She had built a life for her son the way you build something without a blueprint, one piece at a time, with your hands, without any guarantee the next piece will fit. She stood at the podium and answered my questions the way people do when they're not used to being in courtrooms. Carefully, searching for the right words, beginning sentences with "Yes, Your Honor," and ending them with a small nod, even when she was interrupted, even when the pressure of the room made her voice waver. Beside her sat her son. He was 9 years old, small enough that his feet didn't quite reach the floor. He sat with his hands folded in his lap, eyes moving steadily around the room, taking everything in, understanding more than anyone realized. He didn't say a word when they entered. He just watched. The opposing party stood comfortably on the other side of the room. That word is the right one. Comfortably. The kind of ease that belongs to someone who isn't worried about the outcome because they've decided it's already decided. Their posture was relaxed. Their voice was steady. When they spoke about the mother, they didn't address her directly. They spoke about her as though she were a subject being analyzed rather than a person standing 4 feet away. Words like irresponsible and unreliable arrived wrapped in polite language, framed as observations, delivered as facts. The kind of phrasing that sounds measured in a courtroom but lands like something much heavier on the person forced to absorb it in silence. Each time an accusation was made, the mother's shoulders tightened slightly. The boy noticed every time. I pressed forward. I asked sharp questions. I demanded specifics where things felt vague, and I cut off answers that were drifting into territory designed more to imply than to inform. I know when a courtroom is being steered, and I don't allow it for long. But I'll be honest with you. Even with everything I was doing, the imbalance in the room was hard to fully correct, because one side was speaking from a place of security, and the other was speaking from survival. And those two things don't stand level, no matter how fair the process tries to be. The pressure built slowly. The opposing party began interrupting, not aggressively, just enough. Small corrections that weren't really corrections. Clarifications that redirected rather than clarified. Each one chipped away just a little more at the mother's footing. She began apologizing. "I'm sorry, Your Honor. I apologize. I didn't mean to confuse." She was apologizing for being nervous, for being overwhelmed, for standing in a room where the person across from her seemed completely at home, while she felt like she was trying to hold water in her hands. Each apology landed softly, and each time one came, the opposing party leaned back slightly in their chair, the way someone does when a plan is going exactly as expected. I noticed it, but the boy noticed it first. I watched him in those moments, the way his jaw tightened when his mother's voice dropped, the way his fingers pressed harder into the edge of his chair when she stumbled over an answer. He wasn't fidgeting the way nervous children do. He was paying attention the way people do when something important is slipping away and they don't know how to stop it. He kept his eyes on his mother, then on the opposing party, then back on his mother. He was 9 years old, and he was reading the room more clearly than most adults in it. Then came the sentence that changed everything. It arrived quietly, as the worst ones always do. The opposing party paused, let their voice settle into something almost gentle, and suggested, in carefully chosen legal language, that perhaps the child would be better served in a different environment, that the mother's circumstances showed a pattern, that her decisions raised questions about long-term stability. The room absorbed it the way adults absorb things they don't want to react to publicly, with stillness, with professional composure, with the practiced neutrality of people who have learned to separate emotion from procedure. To every adult in that courtroom, it sounded like strategy. To the boy, it sounded like a threat against everything he knew. I saw his breath change. His chest rose and fell faster. His hands, which had been resting quietly in his lap, curled slowly into fists, not from rage, from something more precise than that, from the specific feeling of watching something you love be spoken about as if it has no value. The mother's face slipped, just for a second. She had been holding it together with everything she had. But that suggestion, that quiet, polished suggestion that her child might be better off elsewhere, cracked something. I saw it, a flicker of shame crossing her face that she did not deserve. She opened her mouth to respond. No sound came. The room waited. Her voice didn't return. And that silence stretched in a way that felt dangerous, because silence in a courtroom, when you're the one who needs to be heard, can feel like losing. That was when I heard the chair, a soft scrape against the floor, small, almost nothing, but in a room that quiet, it cut through like a cracking branch in still air. Every head turned. The boy had stood up. He wasn't defiant. He wasn't dramatic. He was simply upright, hands unclenched now and hanging at his sides, chin level, eyes forward, the posture of someone who has made a decision and has stopped being afraid of it. The bailiff shifted. Someone in the gallery inhaled sharply. I looked at him. He looked at me. And before I could restore order, before procedure could step in and remind him that this was not his moment, he spoke. "I just want to say something. That was all," said quietly, said plainly, with the kind of honesty that doesn't know how to put on a performance. No one moved. No one stopped him. I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe because something in his voice made interruption feel wrong. Maybe because the room had been waiting, without knowing it, for something real to cut through everything else. Maybe because there are moments when even a courtroom, with all its rules and structures, recognizes that truth has arrived in a form that does not require permission. He looked at his mother, then back at me, and he began. "She works really late," he said. "Sometimes she comes home when it's dark. Sometimes she leaves before I even wake up." He paused, checking, I think, whether it was okay to continue. No one spoke. "She makes me dinner even when she's tired, and when there isn't enough," he stopped. His brow creased slightly, the way a child's does when they're saying something they've thought about for a long time but never said out loud. "She tells me she's not hungry, but I know she is." A sound came from somewhere in the gallery, soft, involuntary. He kept going. "She helps me with my homework every night, even when her eyes are closing, even when she has to be back at work the next morning." His voice was still quiet, but it had found a kind of steadiness that surprised me. Not the steadiness of someone performing, the steadiness of someone telling the truth and having no reason to say it any other way. "She's nice to people. She brings food to the lady downstairs when she doesn't have enough. She lets me give my toys away to kids who don't have any." He swallowed. "She tells me to be kind, even when people aren't kind to her." The mother had covered her mouth with one hand. Her shoulders were shaking. Across the room, the opposing party had gone completely still. No smirk, no posture of confidence, just stillness. The boy looked at me one more time. "She's not bad," he said. "She's not careless." His voice cracked on the next word. "Just slightly, just enough to feel it. She's just trying." He sat back down, and the room did not move. I want to tell you that I responded immediately, that I gathered myself professionally and continued with the proceeding. But that would not be the truth. I looked at that boy for a long moment. Then I looked down at the papers in front of me. I placed my glasses on the desk. I had been a judge for a very long time. I had maintained composure through things that would have broken most people. I had heard things in my courtroom that I carried home silently and set down carefully before walking back in the next morning. But something about those words, spoken without strategy, without agenda, without anything except love, sat differently. "She's just trying." 3 words, said by a child who had been sitting quietly for an hour, listening to adults describe his mother's life in clinical terms, watching the woman he loved most absorb accusations she didn't deserve, and deciding finally that silence was no longer something he could offer. I cleared my throat. "I need a moment," I said. It came out quieter than I intended, more honest than I planned. I called a recess. When I returned to that bench, I was ready. Not because I had changed what I was going to do. I had known the direction of this case before the boy stood up. The evidence was thin. The accusations were framed in implication more than fact. The opposing party had built a narrative designed to sound authoritative, but it couldn't survive careful scrutiny. What the boy had done was not change the legal outcome. He had changed the weight of it. He had reminded everyone in that room, including me, what was actually at stake behind the paperwork and the procedure. Not a debt, not a claim, not a legal dispute between 2 parties. A child's life, a mother's dignity, a family that had held itself together with nothing but effort and love and the refusal to stop. I delivered the ruling plainly. The claims against the mother did not hold. The evidence did not support them. The attempt to frame her circumstances as a failure of character was rejected. Judgment for the mother. The opposing party absorbed it quietly. There was nothing left to perform. Whatever confidence they had brought into the room had not survived the last hour. The mother didn't react loudly. She exhaled, long and slow. The way someone breathes when they have been holding something heavy for a very long time and have finally been told they can set it down. Then she turned to her son. She dropped to his level without thinking. She pulled him into her arms and held him the way parents hold children when relief and love and gratitude all arrive at the same moment. Tight, real. With her face pressed against the top of his head, he wrapped his arms around her neck and held on. For the first time all morning, he smiled. I let the moment exist without rushing it. Then I asked him to step forward just slightly, not to the podium, just enough to be seen. He came forward, a little uncertain, looking up at me with the same steady eyes that had addressed the entire courtroom an hour earlier. I chose my words carefully. "What you did today took courage," I said. "Real courage. The kind that isn't loud or dramatic. The kind that just tells the truth when telling the truth is the hardest thing in the room." He nodded slowly. "Truth doesn't always come from people with experience or degrees or the right kind of vocabulary," I continued. "Sometimes it comes from the people who simply love the most." I looked at his mother for a moment. "You've raised a child who knows right from wrong and who knows when to stand up for it." Then I looked back at the boy. "Don't ever lose that," I said. "What you did here today, speaking up for someone when everyone else stayed quiet, that matters more than you know, and it will matter for the rest of your life." The gavel fell softly. The case was over. People filed out slowly that afternoon, not the usual rush toward the exit, just a quiet, unhurried movement, the way people move after something they need time to carry properly. Some stopped to compose themselves in the hallway. Others spoke in low voices, shaking their heads gently, not in disbelief, but in recognition. The recognition of having witnessed something they would not quickly forget. The mother and her son walked out together. She kept one hand on his shoulder the entire way. I stayed at the bench a little longer than usual that day. I thought about what the boy had said, not the specific words, though those stayed with me, but the reason he said them, the reason he had sat quietly for as long as he could, absorbing every accusation made against his mother, and finally decided that absorbing them was no longer enough. He hadn't spoken because he understood the law. He had spoken because he understood something the law can sometimes miss, that behind every case there is a person. Behind every claim, there is a life, and behind every verdict, there is a child somewhere who will feel the weight of it. He reminded me of that. A 9-year-old boy with his feet barely touching the floor reminded a judge who had spent decades in courtrooms why she chose this work in the first place. I thought about justice for a long time, about what it actually means when you strip away the procedure and the paperwork and the formal language. I think it means this: every person who walks through that door deserves to be heard. Not just the ones with attorneys, not just the ones who know how to sound credible, not just the ones who come in confident and composed. Every person, including the ones who apologize for being nervous, including the ones whose voice shakes under pressure, including the ones who have been carrying too much for too long and show up anyway. And every once in a long while, justice gets help from an unexpected place. A small chair scrapes back against the floor. A child stands up, and the truth, which had been sitting patiently the entire time, finally gets spoken. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you that courage doesn't come with an age requirement, and that love is sometimes the most powerful evidence in the room, share it with someone who needs to hear it. These are the cases that don't always make headlines, but they're the ones I carry home. They're the reason this work still matters.